There is a war happening right now, in cubicles and small apartments and crowded commutes, and almost nobody fighting it knows they've already lost. Not because they lack effort. Not because they lack intelligence. But because they were handed the wrong objective before the battle even began. Sun Tzu never told his generals to chase the enemy across the battlefield. He told them to choose the ground before a single sword was drawn. Position first. Combat second. Whoever controls the terrain rarely needs to fight at all, the terrain fights for them. Now look at how most people approach money. They wake up and chase it directly. A better job means chasing a slightly higher salary. A rough month means picking up another shift. A dream of freedom means working harder, longer, faster, running straight at the enemy's strongest position and calling it ambition. Nobody tells them there's another way to fight this war. Nobody tells them that the wealthy stopped chasing money generations ago. The rich don't fight for money. They fight for position, the place where money is forced to come to them, again and again, without a battle each time. A landlord doesn't sprint after rent. An equity holder doesn't clock in for dividends. A business owner with the right market position doesn't beg customers to show up. Position does the fighting. Money is just what surrenders afterward. This single distinction, money versus position, is the line that separates people who work themselves into exhaustion from people who quietly compound wealth while barely appearing to try. It is not about luck. It is not about starting capital. It is about understanding, the way Sun Tzu understood, that the battle is already decided the moment you choose your ground. Most people will spend decades fighting a war for money they can never fully win, because the war was designed to be unwinnable that way. But there is a different war available. One fought on higher ground, with far fewer casualties, and a very different ending. Sun Tzu's next principle explains exactly why the ground itself is more valuable than the gold buried beneath it, and why almost no one is ever taught to see it. Sun Tzu never measured a general by how hard his soldiers fought. He measured him by how little fighting was ever necessary. Victory, in his eyes, was decided before the armies met, by whoever had already claimed the better ground. This is the piece almost nobody applies to money, and it changes everything once you see it. Most people are taught to fight for money directly. Work harder, earn more, repeat. It feels logical. It feels like the only path available. But Sun Tzu would recognize this instantly as the weaker strategy, a war fought on the enemy's terms, where effort is the only weapon and exhaustion is the only guaranteed outcome. Picture two co-workers starting the same job, same salary, same ambition. One decides the way forward is more hours, more overtime, chasing every raise available. The other takes a smaller, quieter path, using spare income to buy a small ownership stake in a friend's growing business. 5 years pass. The first co-worker is still fighting the same battle, just with a bigger number attached to it. The second co-worker barely works any harder, yet money now arrives from a direction that never gets tired. Neither of them was smarter. Neither had more starting capital. One was fighting for money. The other was fighting for position. This is where almost everyone gets trapped, believing the fight itself is the goal, when Sun Tzu would say the fight should be avoided entirely whenever possible. Position doesn't ask you to work forever. It asks you to choose correctly, once, and let the ground do what effort never could. But this raises the obvious question, the one most people never get a straight answer to: what actually counts as position in financial terms? Not in theory. Not in vague motivational language. In real, ownable, defensible terms. Sun Tzu had a precise answer for what makes ground valuable, and it has almost nothing to do with how much money sits on it. In The Art of War, Sun Tzu spent entire sections on terrain, not because he loved geography, but because he understood something most people miss: the ground itself does half the fighting. High ground exhausts the attacker before a single blow lands. Narrow passes turn a small force into an unbeatable one. The terrain isn't scenery. It's leverage. Translate this into money, and terrain becomes four things: ownership, access to capital, information advantage, and network leverage. Own a piece of something, and it works while you don't. Have access to capital, and opportunities open that stay closed to everyone else. Know something others don't, and you can move before the crowd even notices there's ground worth taking. Know the right people, and doors open that no amount of individual effort could force. Andrew Carnegie understood this better than almost anyone in his era. He didn't try to win the steel business by simply working harder than competitors. He bought the ground beneath the entire industry, the iron mines, the railroads, the coke ovens, until competitors weren't fighting Carnegie, they were fighting Carnegie's terrain. By the time they realized it, the war was already over. You don't need railroads to apply this. A small business owner who negotiates ownership of their supplier relationships, instead of just their labor, is doing the same thing on a smaller scale. A freelancer who builds a reputation others depend on is quietly claiming information and network terrain that a resume never could. Here's where the strategy gets dangerous, though, because most people, even after understanding this, walk straight past the terrain available to them and back onto the only battlefield they've ever been taught to recognize. It's familiar. It's safe-looking. And it is, according to Sun Tzu's own logic, one of the worst grounds a person can choose to fight on. Sun Tzu warned generals against a specific kind of trap, engaging the enemy on ground the enemy chose, at a time the enemy chose, under rules the enemy controls. He considered it one of the fastest ways to lose a war that could have otherwise been won. And yet this is exactly the battlefield most people report to every single morning. A paycheck looks like safety. It looks like the responsible choice. But look closer at who actually controls the terrain. Someone else sets the ceiling on your income. Someone else decides when you're promoted, when you're valuable, when you're expendable. Someone else owns the thing you're actually building. Your labor gets converted into their equity, their infrastructure, their compounding advantage. You're not on neutral ground. You're on theirs. Think of the skilled employee who's been promoted 4 times in 8 years. Every raise feels like progress. Every new title feels like winning. But the paycheck cycle never actually breaks, it just gets a slightly higher ceiling. Rent still eats the raise. A new tier of expenses always seems to appear the moment income does. This isn't bad luck. It's the predictable outcome of fighting on ground designed to reward effort just enough to keep the war going, but never enough to end it. Sun Tzu never said don't work. He said don't fight where you can't win decisively. A wage can fund the war, it can supply the resources needed to acquire real terrain, but it was never designed to be the terrain itself. Mistaking the paycheck for the prize is how brilliant, hard-working people spend 30 years fighting a battle that was rigged before they enlisted. The way out isn't quitting the wage. It's using the wage as a weapon to build something the wage can never become, a structure that holds ground even while you sleep. Sun Tzu placed enormous value on the fortress, not for its walls, but for what it represented, ground that holds itself, requiring far fewer soldiers to defend than it once took to capture. A well-built fortress works even when the general is asleep. This is precisely what a real financial asset is supposed to do. Equity, property, intellectual property, and investments are the modern fortress. They are built once, often slowly, and then they hold ground indefinitely, generating income, appreciating in value, compounding returns, without demanding a repeat performance of the original effort. This is the exact opposite of wage income, which resets to zero the moment the labor stops. Rockefeller understood fortress building before most of his competitors even understood there was a war. While rivals focused on extracting and selling oil, Rockefeller quietly acquired the pipelines, the refineries, the transportation infrastructure, the fortress surrounding the entire industry. Competitors were still trading time for barrels. Rockefeller had already claimed the ground beneath all of them. You don't need an empire to begin. A small stake in a rental property, shares in a business, a stock position held for years instead of days, these are fortresses in miniature. Small, unglamorous, and quietly working while their owner sleeps, commutes, or does something else entirely. But building a fortress requires something most people instinctively avoid: giving up the comfort of guaranteed, immediate wage income in exchange for the uncertainty of construction. A steady paycheck feels safer in the short term. A fortress feels risky, slow, unproven, right up until the moment it isn't. This is the exact tension Sun Tzu warned commanders about: the pull toward comfortable, familiar ground, even when it's inferior. And it raises the next question the wealthy quietly answered long ago: where, exactly, should that fortress be built? Sun Tzu's most repeated piece of military wisdom was deceptively simple: attack where the enemy is weak, never where they are strong. Charging directly into a fortified position wastes resources on a battle that was avoidable in the first place. The smarter general finds the gap nobody else is watching. Applied to money, this becomes a search for undervalued markets, ignored niches, and overlooked assets, the financial equivalent of empty terrain nobody has bothered to defend yet. Crowded, high-status arenas are crowded precisely because everyone can see the opportunity. By the time an opportunity is obvious to everyone, the terrain has already been claimed, and what's left is a fight for scraps at premium prices. Warren Buffett built an empire on this exact principle. While the excitement of the market chased flashy, popular stocks, Buffett spent decades buying unglamorous, undervalued businesses that everyone else had overlooked: insurance, railroads, furniture retailers. Nobody was fighting him for that ground, because nobody else believed it was worth fighting for. That absence of competition was the entire advantage. The same logic works at a far smaller scale. Someone quietly building a service business in an unglamorous, unsexy industry, plumbing, logistics, local repair work, often finds far less resistance and far more room to grow than someone chasing the latest trending market everyone else has already flooded. Weak resistance isn't a lesser opportunity. It's often the better one. But this strategy carries a hidden danger Sun Tzu understood well: timing. Move on weak ground too early, before the terrain is ready to hold value, and the position collapses under you. Move too late, after the crowd has already noticed, and the weakness is gone. Sun Tzu never treated timing as an afterthought, he treated it as the difference between conquest and disaster. Sun Tzu taught that the wise general wins the war before the first battle is fought, through preparation, positioning, and above all, patience. He distrusted commanders who rushed toward glory. Rushed victories, in his experience, were usually fragile ones, won on borrowed time and paid for later with far greater losses. Financial patience works the same way, and it is the single hardest discipline to maintain, because everything about modern life is engineered to reward speed. Fast money. Fast results. Fast validation. The person building real position must resist all of it, often for years, often with nothing visible to show for the wait. Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett spent decades before the world noticed what they were building. Their early years weren't dramatic. There were no viral wins, no headline-grabbing trades, just quiet, repeated decisions to hold undervalued positions and let compounding do work that impatience could never accomplish. For most of that time, it would have looked, to an outside observer, like nothing was happening at all. That was the illusion. Underneath, the terrain was being claimed one decision at a time. This is the part almost nobody has the stomach for. Waiting doesn't feel like winning. It feels like standing still while others appear to be moving faster. But Sun Tzu would recognize that appearance for exactly what it is, an illusion created by people fighting the wrong war, mistaking motion for progress. The patience isn't passive, either. It's active positioning, held quietly, while the compounding machinery works underneath the surface. And when that patience finally pays off, it doesn't pay off slowly. It pays off in a way that looks, to everyone watching, like it happened overnight. Sun Tzu understood that true victory wasn't measured by a single one battle, it was measured by territory that kept generating advantage long after the fighting stopped. A conquered position that had to be defended and rewon every season wasn't real victory. Real victory was ground that worked for you indefinitely, multiplying strength without demanding constant combat. This is the final and most important distinction between labor income and position income. Labor income is spent, and then it resets. Work a month, get paid, spend it, start again from zero. It never accumulates momentum of its own, it simply repeats. Position income behaves entirely differently. It gets reinvested. It compounds. Each cycle builds on the last instead of erasing it, until the growth stops depending on new effort altogether. Jeff Bezos didn't build Amazon by chasing individual sales the way a shop owner chases daily customers. He built a platform, a piece of terrain so central that other businesses eventually had no choice but to build their own success on top of it. Every seller who joined the marketplace, every customer drawn in by convenience, added strength to a position Bezos didn't have to personally refight each day. The platform did what soldiers used to do, it held the ground. This is the throne Sun Tzu's entire philosophy was quietly pointing toward all along. Not a throne of comfort, but a throne of leverage, one that keeps generating power, income, and options long after the original battle for position has ended. The wage fights for survival today. The fortress fights for freedom tomorrow. The throne stops fighting altogether and simply reigns. Every principle in this script, terrain, patience, weakness, fortress building, was leading here, to the moment position stops requiring war at all. Somewhere between the wage battlefield and the compounding throne, a quiet shift happens, not in your bank account first, but in how you see the war itself. You stop asking, how can I earn more money, and start asking, what ground am I actually standing on? That single change in the question changes everything that follows. Sun Tzu never promised his generals an easy war. He promised them a winnable one, provided they chose their ground before the fighting began, and had the patience to hold it once claimed. Money, applied the same way, stops being something you chase in exhausted circles and becomes something that arrives because the terrain was built correctly, one deliberate decision at a time. The rich were never smarter than everyone else. They weren't luckier, and most of them didn't start with more. What they understood, often quietly and without ever naming it, was Sun Tzu's oldest lesson: position beats effort, every time, in every war that matters. They stopped fighting for money the moment they realized money was never the real objective. Position was. You don't need a fortune to begin building this. You need a wage that funds a small piece of terrain instead of an ever-expanding lifestyle. You need the patience to hold that terrain while it looks, to everyone else, like nothing is happening. And you need to stop mistaking motion for progress, the way most people do for their entire working lives. The battlefield you've been fighting on was never designed for you to win decisively. But there's another one available, quieter, slower to notice, and far more winnable. Sun Tzu already gave you the map. The only question left is which ground you'll choose to stand on.